Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, December 2nd. It's raining, which is good news to all those except folks with drainage issues and nasty neighbors. I name no names. And we're going to change it up a little bit today. I'm turning the tables on Santa Barbara's favorite newscaster, podcaster Josh Molina, who hosts the interesting and informative and entertaining Santa Barbara Talks podcast. So we're going to talk a little news, then we're going to talk a little journalism and see how it goes. Josh, thanks for coming in. I know you're busy with your Christmas shopping, and there's only 22 more days, so I appreciate you taking the time. So one of the big stories this week. The new phase of the endless 101 widening project emerged, and this one is entirely within the city limits of Santa Barbara. How much does it cost? Where's it going, and where's it stand?
So we're talking about the last leg of the HOV, the widening project, and this is all within the city of Santa Barbara. And so, what does this mean? When it starts, it means more construction. It means more slowdown in traffic. But of course, the goal is to make it easier for people to commute in and out of Santa Barbara. The main thing here is that you probably know, I mean, you know this, Jerry, those left hand exits off Highway 101, which go to Cabrillo Boulevard, kind of awkward. We don't see a whole lot of those left-handed exits in California. And so those are going away. And you're going to have to get off on the right side into a new Cabrillo interchange. And so that sort of affects the entire flow of that intersection. There's going to be a new roundabout and they're putting up sound walls. And so there was a meeting to talk about this project. And, really, Caltrans can kind of do whatever it wants, but they're going to the city of Santa Barbara and the ABR for design aesthetic review. And they were sort of talking about things like how much vegetation should cover the walls and what the cobblestone should look like, these sort of aesthetic details. But the big thing is that we're going to be able to have a little more circulation, but we don't exactly know when. It's unfunded. This leg of the project is unfunded. And
$260 million or something like that, euros.
yeah, I have the number in my Newshawk story, and it's I think what you just said. And so what's constantly happening with this funding initiative is these government agencies are looking to get grants, get federal funding to raise the money to pay for it. So it's unfunded. The idea is that once it's funded or partially funded, they will get it going and it will open up. So this is a significant deal, of course, because it's Montecito, and at the other end, it's at close to Montecito, and at the other end, they're about to break ground in a couple of weeks on this new roundabout, which is going to be pretty hellish for
Where is
anybody
that?
who's
Where is that,
so
Josh?
that's over there by the Montecito Inn, Olive Mill Road, and it's gonna make the circulation. Right now, it's a 5-point intersection.
Yeah.
So you got five people coming
Where you
in, and
jump on the 101 there, right? Yeah.
exactly, and so they're gonna make that into a roundabout. It's already pretty hellish to be on Coast Village Road from 3 to 5 o'clock because people use that instead of 101, and both are busy. So we're gonna well, I don't think construction will be going on simultaneously, but we will have years of construction because of these two projects.
Do we know how many years am I gonna live to be able to drive the roundabout?
Well, definitely the one on Olive Mill. The other one too. It's always a moving target. But yes, Jerry, I think you'll be around to appreciate it when it's finally done in 8 to 10 years.
Well, thank you for that, Josh. But it's a big deal. So it's like 16 miles, right? Of it's affecting. You reported. So are they going to go ahead with it even though they don't have the funding? And how can they not have the funding? I mean, the feds have been shoveling money out the door. You know, lit the economy to a high rate of inflation. I mean, if they can't score some money for this, I worry about Salute. Maybe, we should start looking at alternatives for Representative Carbajal.
Oh man, we're going to talk about Brad Allen again. No. So I mean, I think they're constantly applying for money, and if they miss out on a cycle one year, then they're going to try to do it another year. There's many projects throughout the state that are competitive, but this 101, what is this? 20 years? This whole thing? I remember when I was first hired at the News Press in '99, it was this it was called 101 in Motion or something like that, and it's not in motion, from 3 to 5 o'clock most days.
All right, bottom line, more bad traffic. All right. I mentioned your podcast at the top, and you had a very, very interesting guest on this week, Frank Hotchkiss, the former city council member and pornographic author,
I mentioned you, Jerry, on the podcast.
who's
I mentioned you had read it and you commented on his writing.
Yeah, I wrote a whole column on it. It's really quite interesting. Yeah, the whole thing about, older man and younger, it was kind of cringeworthy for me. That's all. But anyway, he's moved on. He's living in Savannah, Georgia, but he had some interesting reflections from his perspective as an ex city council member about the city and city government. What were the highlights?
Well, I'm just going to start with the lead. The most shocking thing of everything he said was he drives an Uber. He drives a Tesla and is an Uber driver in Savannah, Georgia. And I just thought this was the most amazing, piece of the podcast because, as we know, Frank Hotchkiss is a conservative and well-to-do, and he's a really nice guy. But the idea of seeing him driving around people around and as an Uber driver is hilarious. But he's real prideful about it. He said he had this friend who introduced him to a Tesla. He loved it. So he got one. And then he said, how do I get to know people in this new town? And what a great way than to be an Uber driver. So he just sort of talks about all the people he meets who come in and out, and he has these great conversations with them. And he said he knows the town probably better than a lot of realtors. So he was talking about it in a positive way. I don't know how many Tesla.
He's writing a newspaper column.
Yeah, and he also has a newspaper column where he writes about movies filmed in Savannah, Georgia that people may not know about. And so he's got some little monthly or weekly column. He talked about Randy Rouse. He basically very effusively praised Randy as being an adult in the room and never mentioned Kathy Maria's name, but it was very clear that he was trying to say that Randy is not Kathy and the city's way better without Kathy. Of course, Frank ran against Kathy for mayor and was unsuccessful. Probably would have won had it not been for your little poll over there, Jerry, that you decided to release.
It wasn't little. It cost us $3,000, but go ahead.
Which told everybody, holy crap, Frank's in first place. And, that got the Dems going. So that's your fault.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I think we published the poll 3 weeks before the election or something like that. And Frank did, he was statistically tied with Kathy. This is the 2017 mayor's race. Because I think at that time, people in Santa Barbara, vote for entertainment and chiefly among them Republicans. And so it was a survey both of voters and of the votes that had already been cast. And so I think there were a lot of Republican votes, and he got his vote in early, but he peaked. We probably published it on the day he peaked, but you're right. It led to this big scramble among the Dems. And I remember Monique Limones, one day I'm not getting involved in the mayor's race. I'm not going to endorse. And then DeRocca explained the facts of life to her. And the next day, oh, I'm all for Kathy, and Salud did the same thing. He was going to stay out and then he jumped in. But anyway, it's an interesting footnote about city politics. And
he also talked about Ariel Kalan, and
what he
kind
said.
of I mean, he was very PR-ish, but he said that Ariel did a good job. He didn't know anything more than anyone else. He, thought should have been some way to be more transparent, but with the public, but he didn't really know how that could happen because it's a personnel issue. But he didn't trash him by any means. So that was that. And he's more offering his reflections of Santa Barbara from his lens. He still talks to Randy. That was really clear.
Well, that was a good get. That's an interesting conversation. Now, did he by any chance do an "I told you so" on Measure C, that they were going to spend it for whatever they wanted, and that's why we should have sunsetted it?
No, that didn't come up. It probably I probably should have asked him about it, but no. But we did talk about other legacies, which was cruise ships. So he did a dance in the end zone there for any revenue the city has from cruise ships. And he also told the story, which I didn't know, but he got Edison to fund the Christmas tree downtown because they had tried to get rid of it at one point, and then they funded it and brought it back. And that was something he was real proud of. But it was really clear that he wanted to get the point across that Kathy Murillo is no longer mayor and the city's much better off for it from his perspective.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of legacies, a lot of musical chairs, political changes going on. Greg Hart, Supervisor Hart, elected to the assembly, so he'll be. I guess they said farewell to him at the meeting this week. And then Laura Capps, who was unopposed in the second district, will be moving to the Soups from the school board, Santa Barbara Unified, along with her close ally, Kate Ford, who's decided not to run again. So let's start with the school board. Gabe Escobedo elected, but there's going to be a vacant seat. They're going to appoint somebody. How does that all shake down? What do you think that's going to mean?
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see who is going to apply for the seat to replace Laura Capps. I haven't heard a whole lot of buzz. I haven't heard a lot of names. I don't know. I actually did check in with the conservatives. I checked in with the Dem Party. I didn't hear. I mean, they're not talking, but they're saying, we don't really have anybody at this point. I did hear a name of Lanny Evanstein being somebody, but also in the same breath being told that he wouldn't get picked because that's he doesn't fit the demographic of what that board might think would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean that's a what is that, District 1 or trustee area ship 1 on the school board, which is what, the east side. Yeah, it's a I don't think it's a minority majority district, but it's
No.
heavily minority. So all right. What, you do know what the deadline is for that if people want to apply?
No, I am going to work on a story on that, but I don't know. I think it's sometime in January, and then they'll start their interview process. Gabe Escobedo is obviously going to fill that seat, and he just came off of a campaign. He's replacing Kate Ford. So, you know, Kate was really smart on the policy. She had that history. She served as a principal and a superintendent, and she just had all of those roles on her resume. So she brought that historical context. So definitely a big loss there in terms of what that board had. Gabe's going to bring something different, and I'm sure he'll grow into the position in his own way. I think what's interesting is maybe we're seeing Laura's gone. Okay. And Laura was, really Laura and Kate, kind of the powerhouse, right? The power behind the board. And so with those two gone, there's a
They're
chance.
the ones who really pushed out Carrie Matsuoko and also brought in Hilda.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
They pushed out Carrie and they brought in Hilda and they defended Hilda. And so it's going to be interesting to see what factions emerge here and who emerges as the leader. I think Virginia Alvarez would have wanted to seek that, but I don't think she's done that. We'll see if she's able to emerge as sort of that leader, but she's kind of caught in the middle. She's not really in with the Dems, and she's not really totally in as well with, conservatives. So she's sort of in the middle Gabe has a lot of potential to sort of take over is that role. Wendy Sims Moten, of course, plays a role. So to me, that's the most interesting thing to see what new factions are going to emerge and who's going to come out of this as the real power broker, because it has been Kate and Laura.
Well, obviously that appointment will be crucial, but I think you're as usual stumbling into the truth here. I think Gabe is going to be the guy. I mean, I agree. Obviously, that Kate is a really insightful and thoughtful person, but I think Gabe is as well. And as you say, sort of with a different direction to it. So I would look for him to pretty rapidly become the guy who's kind of, at least framing the key issues there. And as you know, there's a lot of fighting about ethnic studies and wokeness and sex education and other things. So that'll be interesting. And then Laura replacing Greg on the supervisors. What do you make of that? How do you think what impact that'll have?
Makes me want to cover the board of supervisors just so I can see Laura and Doss, talk about pot and cannabis. um, Laura's really good on the policy. Greg's really good on the policy. I think they're going to agree on a lot of the issues. Laura brings a lot more of the environmental sensibilities. She brings obviously that Washington D.C. big picture, sort of nuanced understanding of how things work. So, I don't know. I think Laura's going to emerge, do everything she can to be the real power broker on that board. And I think she's going to probably clash with Doss in ways that Doss and Greg learned how to get along well in public. So I think it's going to be really good theater to watch, especially with this decline in cannabis revenue and the whole narrative changing from where it was when they ran against each other in that campaign, to see this play out. And now Doss has to treat her as an equal. It's not I have the seat and I'm in the position, and you have your name. And so, well, now she has the seat and she's there and she's an equal. So I think it's going to be pretty interesting to watch how things play out.
Yeah, well, that's you're right. I mean, just go back to 2020 when she did challenge him, lost. But what were her two big issues? That he had led the way to overextending the county on cannabis, on implanting the industry, and that there was a sleaze factor to it, that he was taking a lot of money for it. And those with long memories will recall that she also put forward this very detailed ethics plan for elected officials about limits on campaign contributions. And we were talking, as you know, before the show about a new bill that's going into effect in January 1, state law, which hasn't gotten a lot of focus, Senate Bill 1439, which is going to prohibit elected officials from voting on any matter involving someone or an entity from which they have received $250 or more, which ain't much in terms of campaign. So that has the potential to really change the way things are done, and I think take a big step toward instilling the kind of ethical framework that she was talking about.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting because there's so many people who give increments of money during a campaign throughout the cycle that exceed $250. And if you can't vote on, a matter that they're involved with, that's huge ramifications for sure. So they're not going to give money, or maybe they'll do a pact or something like that in order to get around it. But that would be significant, not just at the board of supervisors, but
yeah, no, it's going to be
smaller city council.
I don't know what the who's exempted under that, but at first blush, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, SEIU, all of the people, the pay to play contracts for public workers, it might be called into question. So that's going to be a big change. Okay. let me see what else I want to. Oh yeah, I just want to underscore what you just said about the pot revenues, which are now down to $1 million. Of course, this was going to save everything, and I guess in the state of the county presentation, they're still pushing the fiction that it is, which is a big crock. And you know, I rant about this almost weekly, but here's the thing: I think that Steve Lavalino and Das Williams, you know, probably had the best of intentions about, you know, we were going to be a leader in the great new cannabis industry, and it was going to become a world brand, Santa Barbara pot or whatever, and it really screwed things up. I mean, it created all of this conflict all over the county. You know, it didn't deliver on obviously what it was supposed to, which is the cannabis. And the hardest thing for a politician is to say, you know, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I screwed that up. And it would be really nice to hear that from one of the others. And, you know, they're constantly trying to make these adjustments to make things better. But, you know, read Nick's story about it this week. I mean, the enforcement is down. You know, half the people growing pot still don't have a permit. I mean, it's just a big mess. And you know, I think they would gain so much goodwill among the voters by just saying, you know, we really made some mistakes here, and here's what they were, and we're trying to make them make it better. But my prediction for 2023 is that's never going to happen. So anyway, all right, I want to talk a little bit about journalism. Uh, and both kind of cosmic, meta, and also local. But let me start with Newshawk, where much of your work appears. Bill McFadden, the big boss over there, in his weekly column, introduces this week by saying there's going to be a big, I guess, at least technical change at Newshawk starting on December 7th. I don't know if I would pick Pearl Harbor Day as the date when I wanted to roll something out, but you know, uh, horses for courses or courses for horses. Anyway, what's the change that's coming?
Well, I think to readers, they're going to see a new look, a new design for the Newstalk website. It's going to be more modern. The back end is a WordPress back end. And so there's more functionality in terms of how we present the story. So I know that much. I know that it's a transition to this Newspack organization that sort of oversees this process. And so Newstalk's going to look different. The placement of the stories, the sizes of the photos, the pull quotes, the headlines, the mug shots, you know, all of that is going to look different. And it's a good thing because, you know, we need to, you know, online websites have really advanced and some of them are fantastic out there and people have super high standards for a website. So I think it's a good thing. We're going to look more modern and we're going to be able to have more different types of displays. And that's great for reaching new audiences who maybe aren't interested so much in the news, but they're visually going to be captured by how the website looks. So that's what the public's going to see. And you know, on the back end, some of us are having to learn new systems in terms of how to use WordPress and post stories, and you know that whole thing that newspapers do every few years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just raises all of these interesting questions because what is it, 14 years now Newshawk has been publishing and stuff. And you know, great credit to Bill and Tom for doing that. And you know, because of the historic event known as the News Press Mess in 2006, 2007, which really made a big change in the journalistic landscape of Santa Barbara, shall we say. You know, the upside of it was it sort of became this little petri dish or laboratory for new forms of journalism, which reflect what's happening out there, you know, across the country, and Newshawk being a good example. You know, kind of a boutique, very hyper local, but depending on its audience, not depending as much on advertisers, which was, of course, the traditional newspaper model. It's a subscription based, and subscriptions are becoming more and more important. I mean, you look at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I mean, they've been able to do that at scale and into the new world. But it's nice to see, and I would include the Independent in that too. I think they were a little late to the game in terms of the subscription, but they now have a process for doing that, and I think that the way is going. But I mean, even I would say you, Josh, are another example of, you know, kind of the changes that have happened where, you know, you have a portfolio of journalistic endeavors that you do. You're your own brand, I think, which is another thing that's really changed in journalism. But one of the things you do is you're a journalism teacher, both at City College and as well as at Cal State Northridge. Talk about that a little in terms of, you know, Gannett laid off thousands of people this week, the biggest newspaper publisher in America. CNN laid off a bunch of people. I mean, it doesn't look like good times for journalism. What do you do when students ask you, you know, should I go into journalism? What would I do? You know, what would be my professional pathway?
Well, I usually tell them, whatever you do, don't go into public relations, because that's the worst thing you can do. I'm only
Shout out to our friends Laura Bianchi and Cami.
and I'm only half joking there, by the way. But so there's a few things at a community college. Many of them, they see in the course catalog, it says journalism, and it says learn about the mass media, learn how to write news report, write features, and it's really alluring. Okay, and so a lot of them sign up thinking they're going to study fake news, they're going to study media literacy, and they're also going to play journalist for a while. And that's a great place because they're curious and they don't quite know their major yet, or they're kind of interested in writing. So I don't come down on the first week or anything like that and say, here's how journalism has declined in the last 25 years. Like I don't do that, because for the community college student, it's about sparking that interest in something they enjoy and they love and they appreciate, and finding their voice. And for a lot of students, it's about writing. And if you can pair a desire for writing with the purpose of journalism, you have a student where the light bulb just goes off and they have this spark and this fire. And so that's what I'm trying to teach them. And once that happens, they can go anywhere. They can do
Well,
anything they want.
and let me just give you a little pat on the back. I mean, some of your students are now kind of key reporters in Santa Barbara. Ryan P. Cruz over at the Independent, June Starkey down at the Coastal View News, and previously Delaney. Yeah, I mean, so there's a few that actually do try to take the lunge and figure out how to make it work as a job.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all three of those, Delaney Smith, of course, is like top of the list there of like from a community college and going and do that incredible work she did at the Independent for a couple of years. And so that's what it's all about. It's about finding that student and say, you can do this. And of course, they work at the student newspaper as well, and they get that experience. So once they love it, then you sort of talk to them about options, and you're realistic. And you say, if you get hired somewhere, you might be making 30 grand a year in your first job, 35, if you're lucky, 40, right? When I got hired at the News Press in 99, it was $47,000, right? And that was like, holy cow, right? That's so much, right? But that's not what other people in other majors get
No,
hired right at.
you could make a decent living, and as a middle class person. Yeah.
Right. And so they understand that. And so what happens once they learn the reality of the amount of hard work that it takes to be a journalist, coupled with the fact that you've got to do it every day, and that you're always chasing that high of the byline over and over and over, with the low pay, many of them will, decide they are going to pursue other majors, but they learn how to write and they learn how to believe in themselves and find their voice. Okay. But some of them, astonishingly and just so thankfully, are okay with it. They still believe that journalism is important and it's
And that's,
meaningful.
is that typical of your students at Northridge?
Yeah, so teaching at CSUN I've been teaching there a year, and it's an entirely different flip because these students, CSUN's a Hispanic serving campus, so it's like 65-70% Latinx population. There's a higher population of African American students, Latinx students, and my classrooms look entirely different than my Santa Barbara City College classrooms. And right there, that the future of journalism in California, Jerry, is students of color. And that's largely because journalism is shifting and it's becoming about this industry where we want to tell the stories that have traditionally not been told by legacy media, by the people in a conference room behind a desk making top-down decisions about what makes news. And so for you and I, that's really hard for us because we love the watchdog journalism. I mean, the city council meeting for me is like going to a movie or something. Like it's so entertaining. It's such theater. It's so important. But a lot of the new age of journalism is about what's this term called engagement journalism, which is going out into the communities and asking them what stories matter to them and then trying to write those stories. And it's something as simple as doing, sending out Google Forms with surveys and asking questions and getting that feedback and then finding people to tell those stories. And that is a whole new thing, right? So if you and I are sitting around, in the old days of the newsroom, we might be thinking about different angles and this could be a story and talk to that person and oh, this trend is emerging. And that's really smart journalism planning. But the new sort of thinking is, what do we know? Let's go talk to the people who are experiencing it and saying, you tell us the stories you think are not being told because we want to tell your story. That's really risky, because journalists still have to control what the stories are because we don't want to be activists. So it's finding that balance between sharing your stories. One of the classic examples of this is ProPublica story where they did a big engagement journalism project about maternal mortality. And so what they did was they went and they read news obits and they reached out to the families of these women who died. And what they found was that the highest rate of maternal mortality in the developing world is the United States, and Black women are the number one demographic. And so they reached out into that community and said, tell us your stories. And they actually did this thing, Jerry, which I mean is really amazing. They wrote a script and they said, we want you to talk to your mother, or the mother, we want you to talk to your daughter. And here are the questions. And we want you to facilitate this and we want you to record it. And that's going to be the essence of what our journalism is. We're going to publish those raw conversations. And that's very different than your traditional feature
Well,
story.
yeah, I mean, it's looking at the other end of the telescope. I mean, traditionally, and for better or for worse, I think for better. I mean, stories were told from the perspective of institutions,
Right.
The city council, the board of supervisors, hospitals, whatever it was, it was, this is what the authorities say. It was kind of the starting point, and then maybe and the authorities are lying or whatever it is. Is there a danger that kind of watchdog reporting is going to get lost in the push for engagement?
Yeah, and that's one of the big challenges. So at CSUN, a lot of my students, I teach an engagement journalism class. They don't really get excited about covering meetings. It's not interesting to them because they think it's boring. And so that's not everybody, right? There's always some in the room who do want to cover those. It's a different way of doing the storytelling. You know, can you, instead of covering the meeting live, let's talk to the people who are impacted at this meeting and go out there and facilitate a conversation, you know, and so we need both. And I think there's enough interest still in having both types of journalism. But the engagement journalism is interesting because you get real raw authenticity and stories from a community that if they're sharing it, it's much more close to the truth than having that top down sort of mentality. The other thing is that students want to go into broadcast, right? I mean, students love journalism, but to go into your earlier point, what I teach is what I unfortunately learned later in life. And I learned a little bit from you without you even actually trying to teach it to me, is the importance of self-branding. Because what happens is you can have your whole career and that company owns your content, and your brand and your identity sticks with the company. So if I go to somebody and say I worked for 2.5 years at the San Jose Mercury News, right? They're like, oh, you worked at the Mercury News, right? That's a really good paper. My brand is tied to that institution. Okay. I go tell somebody I worked at the Santa Barbara News Press for 7 years. My brand is tied to that, right? Even though when I was there, it was a great place. Okay. So what and all my content, by the way, is behind a paywall there that I'll never see again in my life, right? So
They,
what I
pro-
try to,
they probably deleted all your content. I wouldn't worry
yeah,
about it.
my bylines are actually gone from a lot of
Yeah.
those articles. I'm just news press staff writer. But what I try to teach them is that no matter what you go into, if you're a media person, if you're a journalist, a communications person, you need to have a website, you need to have a YouTube channel, you need to be writing, you need to be blogging. And I'm not on TikTok, but they need to be on social media, comfortable communicating with their audience, because the best way is for them to own their content. Because when somebody else owns your content, that stays with them. And then if you get fired one day, then you got to rebuild all over. So I try to instill that with them. And that's really important. You know, TV has a little bit more of that. Those TV reporters, they've sort of understood that and they can hop around and people are like, oh, now they're on that network. So I think that's the biggest lesson. Where are they going to work? Who knows? You know, but they're going to believe in themselves and they're going to have a brand that they can go in different directions. It's interesting. We're talking about this. The LA Times launched that 404 LA Times. I don't know if you've seen it. They launched it earlier this year. It's a all social media account, and they hired all these young people, and they tell the news through funny little videos. So they will tell the story of the drought, for example. There's a puppeteer. They do it through puppets. They do it through graphics, and that is a new way that of telling news, of telling stories that is emerging. You still have to have those reporting skills, but it's a different sort of thing. And so self-branding is so important. And I always tell them, start a newsletter, start getting your emails right now, because as you know, you have a huge email base. So you have a huge following. You don't have a newspaper. You don't need it, because people will come to your website every time you put out your newsletter. And so getting them to think about me, you know, themselves, as opposed to, I want to go work for Vice, right? Which is what every young journalist has wanted to do for the last 10 years. You know, it's like, well, it's kind of hard, right? Very few of you are going to do it. You might be able to,
It's like
but
getting
let's
in the
focus.
NBA.
Exactly. You know, so that self branding is really important. And newsletters, they're not even the future. They're now. You can get monetized. You make money, subscriptions. It's a real thing. If you just got to become an expert on something, and
Yeah.
if that's the only place people can get it, they value that. And
Yeah.
my students, they don't go to the LA Times in the morning. They don't go to the New York Times in the morning, right? But they will check out what they're interested in every morning.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting having reached the age of 115, you know, when I kind of look back, I mean, yeah, I think you said 25 years. I think it might be a little longer than that. The transformation that began, you know, largely with the internet, but even before that, advertisers were or dropping off, where you had these, big institutional gateways, the newspaper in town, or maybe there were two, and they decided, the editors, what the news was and pushed it out. And, of course, that all got blown up and atomized. It's coming the other way now, individuals. And there's some good things about that, and there's some bad things. I have to say that in terms of local media and in terms of coverage, I think we had 65 people in the newsroom in 2006. And now, how many people do you think there are, that are actual reporters in Santa Barbara? Maybe 10% of that, maybe 20%, 12, 15 people, something like that.
10, yeah.
And
12,
and it's, you, as a reader, you really have to graze, look at Newshawk, look at the Independent, what's on Ed Hat today, what is KYT doing, to be fully informed. I think in a way that in our past lives, everybody went to the same place, and so there was an agreed upon set of facts. What no matter what side you were on, in debating, Measure C, I'm against taxes and for it. It was about the policy. It wasn't about the fact of, is how much does this going to do, or, all the money's going to go into, pederast, or whatever it is. It's just so that the whole disinformation, misinformation, lack of agreement on facts, sort of ascribing motives to everybody, you're on team blue or you're on team red, has really changed things. And I have to say, I know I sound like an old guy, but, not for the better. I just, you hustle, Nick hustles, I all credit to the people that are doing it, but, trying to cover the amount of ground that, was previously covered by 5 or 10 people, it's just hard. It's just a hard thing.
I was talking about this to someone the other day. It was like last week I covered a Santa Barbara Harbor story. I covered a city council story. I covered a county housing element story. I covered a Goleta school board story, and I covered a Santa Barbara school board story. I'm good with that, because if you remember back in the day, I was always like 2-3 stories a day. It's normal. But back in the day, I wouldn't have to, because we would have one person covering Goleta, one person covering the school board, one person covering the harbor, the waterfront, not the city, just the waterfront. And so, yes, as great as Nick Welsh is, and whatever I am, whatever we are, we're just a fraction of what we should be, which is just blanketing this whole community with all of that kind of news. And who benefits? I'm doing these series on the housing element, and now the county's going to miss the deadline. Kind of stumbled into it because I watched that meeting. In the old days, we would have broke the story back in August that the county was behind, and that these sites were being targeted for agriculture, and that they're having these meetings with the property owners to decide whether they agree or not. And before they announce it, like, we would be breaking that in the moment and affect what happens. Instead, the sad thing, and we do a good job in this community, but all journalism is just so reactionary.
Yeah.
Right? It's lost that proactive aspect.
We used to, that was our goal, was, setting the agenda for the community and getting out ahead of stuff. This whole cannabis thing would not have happened the way it happened if Barney McManigal, was still here covering the Board of Supervisors, because he would have sniffed it out like that. And, the public.
And he didn't like Doss either, Jerry. So he would.
No,
no offense, Barney.
It's just, it would have been out ahead of the decision makers, rather than this all getting made, in secret with all their little lobbyist friends. So, it's a loss. On the other hand, as you say, this engagement journalism, it's storytelling, and that's ultimately what journalism is. And I think, the people who are preparing and training to do it now have to tell stories in multiple platforms, the way that you do. You have to do blogs, and you have to do video, and you have to just put yourself out there in all kinds of ways, newsletters and so on. So I guess, on balance, yeah, some good, some bad, but I just think they're getting away with murder. If the city council and the board of supervisors, the courts. I mean, we don't have any, who covers the courts on a regular basis? I mean, it's kind of crazy. The school
Oh yeah,
board.
the amount of civil litigation that is filed that maybe we get a tip on it or something like that.
Cammy's
I wrote that.
full-time job was covering the Santa Barbara Unified School Board, one person to cover that, not to mention the county and Goleta and all the other things. So, okay, well, it's not like it was in my day. Here I am, get off
Well,
my
what?
lawn.
But Jerry, I mean, Jerry, you joke like that, but give you a pat on the back. I mean, you are as relevant as any news organization in
Which
town.
is a sad commentary. I
Because
rest
of
my
your web.
case.
I mean, there are people who will get your newsletter and think that's all they need in this town, and that's that must feel good, and that's from you trying to stay relevant in an online environment, and that's visionary in your own way.
Yeah, well, we do what we can, Josh, one foot in front of the other. All right, let's wrap it up there. Josh Molina, thanks so much for coming on my anti-podcast and being the subject of things, and as always, keeping us well informed on what's going on in the community. And we will see you next time on Newsmakers. Josh Molina, thanks again. Take care, be safe, don't get COVID or any of those other things that's going on. Bye.